Say that he wasn't contacted by the White House. The White House also facing questions because the president went forward with that trip to Bedminster, New Jersey for a fundraiser and event yesterday in New Jersey after the White House had learned that Hope Hicks had tested positive.
George, I just had a physical reaction to hearing Chris Christie say that he hadn't been contacted and learned from the media that Hope Hicks had been infected and tested positive. I mean, that just raises serious, absolutely serious questions about the contact tracing methods that the White House has been using. And you mentioned it, that big trip to Bedminster that we know the president took, even though he knew that he had been exposed, potentially exposing 100 some odd supporters there who've now been told by the governor of New Jersey to take the appropriate precautions in the wake of that presidential visit. But this is coming at a time when the polls show the majority of Americans don't trust the president's handling of the coronavirus. They don't trust what he's said on this. He has, frankly, misspoken, mistruth after mistruth on how serious this virus is. You'll remember he told Bob Woodward, he admitted that he intentionally downplayed the severity of the virus to Americans because he'd said that he didn't want to worry them, even though at the time when he made that statement, he knew exactly how dangerous this was. There are just serious questions right now about how I think forthcoming the White House has been and will be about the president's condition, about the lead up to it. We are still waiting to find out exactly, when he was first tested. The White House not saying that. There are also, George, we've been talking about this over the last 4 years, questions about the president's health. We don't have a full record, a complete record of how healthy or not healthy he has been leading up to this, just like he didn't release his tax returns. He's not been fully forthcoming about his own health conditions. There was that big mystery trip last year to Walter Reed that we still don't really know exactly why he went. And I was just going to say, George, as a White House correspondent, I've just been pretty astounded in the last, 12, 15 hours since all of this broke, watching the fallout take place over the course of the day at the White House and still seeing, even as the president has tested positive for coronavirus, aide after aide addressing the media vis-a-vis the American public, not wearing masks today. It's been a pretty astounding day so far.
Yeah, and we're wondering at what point will the president's doctor come out and give a full briefing on the president's conditions. I want to go back to Jen Ashton for more on this. So we know that people have come in contact clearly with the president since last Saturday, and at least two other people who were at that announcement for Judge Amy Coney Barrett last Saturday. The president of Notre Dame, Senator Mike Lee of Utah, have also tested positive for the virus. Several members of the cabinet have come out and said they've tested negative. But for someone who's been in contact with the president in the last 24 and 48 hours, an immediate negative test doesn't necessarily mean you're in the clear, correct?
Absolutely correct, George. So I actually asked Dr. Anthony Fauci about this question after exposure to a confirmed case of COVID-19. When is the optimal time to get your test? And he said day 3, day 4, day 5. We know the average incubation period for this virus is 5.2 days. And we also know, based on data, that people who are pre-symptomatic can shed the virus and be contagious up to 48 hours before they themselves develop symptoms. So that would be the time to get your test, day 3, day 4, day 5. Getting tested immediately right after exposure is not that clinically meaningful and can absolutely present the possibility of a false negative result. So contact tracing is key. We've heard from the beginning, critical to control this outbreak is test, trace, and isolate, and it seems like there are some big issues in the contact tracing department of that equation.
President Trump, was across the room from former Vice President Joe Biden on Tuesday night at that debate. We learned this morning from the former Vice President that he has tested twice now negative today for the coronavirus. He's gone to Michigan for a campaign event. Mary Bruce is covering him.
And George, just a short while ago at that campaign event, Joe Biden said that this is not a matter of politics, that this is a bracing reminder, as he said, to all of us that we have to take this virus seriously. He did offer his well wishes to the president and the First Lady. You mentioned he did receive 2 negative tests today, one from a doctor in Delaware and another, he said, by the former White House doctor who came up. That may be part of the reason why it took several hours this morning for us to get an answer about the status of his own condition. But, it was notable that during his speech just now, the former vice president kept his mask on for the entire time. and he implored Americans to wear them too, saying, this is not about being a tough guy. Those are the words he used. He again argued that masks are a matter of being a good patriot, looking out for your fellow Americans. And he did call for all Americans to have the same access to testing, saying that it's not just people in the White House or those who travel, with him or are part of his campaign that deserve to have that kind of safety and peace of mind. There has been a lot of questions about why Biden is back on the campaign trail today, given that just on Tuesday, of course, he was on that debate stage with the president for 90 minutes, even though they were socially distanced over 13 feet apart, but they were not wearing masks. We have asked the Biden's campaign about this, and they say that they felt comfortable resuming their campaign travel because, one, Biden tested negative, but also they say he was not directly in close contact with the president, and they say he was wearing a mask at all times during the debate except for when he was on that
right,
stage.
and there was no encounter backstage between the president and former Vice President Biden?
They have not said that explicitly, but they say that he was not in direct contact with the president, so that is the implication they seem to be giving us, George.
Okay, Mary Bruce, thanks very much. Let me bring Rahm Emanuel right now. Rahm, you're a strong supporter of Vice President Biden. Is he handling this correctly in the wake of this kind of bombshell announcement from the president?
Yes, I mean, two things, George. One is he's handling it correctly by obviously wishing the president and the first lady that they speedy recovery, and then also be reassuring to the public as a whole, not just as a candidate, an opponent of the president, but as an American. And I think, to be honest, that goes to his core point of what he said, even when you disagree with me, I'm going to be your president. And his whole message is about unity, bringing the country together. And I think I hate saying this, given you're dealing with a health crisis or a health challenge for the president, he did it exactly right for his message. I can only imagine now, looking at the helicopter there on the South Lawn, the battle between the medical team, the communications team, and the White House political team, that you have a president, the image of making a decision we're going to have to take to the hospital.
And that's what I wanted to ask you about, because you're a former White House chief of staff as well for President Obama. This is about as complicated a set of issues you can deal with, and the most personal set of issues you can deal with for a president.
Well, one of the things that any chief of staff doesn't like is when it involves what I call the East Wing, meaning the first lady and family and et cetera. And you have the doctors and the medical team obviously made a decision that the White House is not good enough, God forbid, given now you have a fever, you have some conditions. I know it's all said as preventive, but this has an implication that the White House is just not set up for this. So we have to be at a hospital. Then you have the political team saying, do you understand that we started the morning on our own 2-yard line, and this is going to put us on our 1-yard line, if not worse. And they're weighing in, probably saying this is horrible. And then you have the family's own considerations, and in this case, both the president/patient consideration. And so I've had situations where you have national security saying one thing, political team saying another, and in the end of the day, you can't really find a weight of equities, and you have to pick one side of that scale or the other. And you can see with that helicopter there, the medical team won this argument.
From a purely nonpartisan perspective, as a former White House chief of staff, if you can just put on that institutional hat, what should we be hearing from the White House right now?
I think two things. One is if I were them right now, I'd get the medical team and doctors, as soon as the helicopter's up, I'd get them out with a press conference in the White House press briefing room to answer all questions. It will be a level of transparency that I think the country needs, and to be honest, the presidency needs and this president needs. So all three of those aspects need the transparency, and I would put a full medical team with a full report answering and prepared to answer all the questions. And I think this is the commander-in-chief, leader of the free world, the president of the United States, who's being taken to a hospital because he's contracted the virus. I think that's the only way, because I think we all feel this. Just think of this week. Supreme Court nominee, tax returns, debate, and the president contracting COVID. And the week's not over. And so they need to calm the waters down. And the only way to do that is to get people that are apolitical to deliver a message of full, open kimono transparency.
Jen Ashton, I know you want to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I think what Rahm just said is completely on point. You don't just need to hear from the president's physician. You need to hear from the entire medical team. That includes infectious disease specialists, pulmonologists, multiple other specialists who are all consulting on his care, and a full debrief of all the evaluations and his vital signs, what his pulse oximeter is, whether a chest x-ray has been done, whether his EKG is normal, what other medications they are starting him on, whether as a therapy or as a precaution. And I think that we need to, get to that step. And I think there are a lot of people, both in the lay public and the medical profession, who would be interested in that information and reassured if it is, just a precautionary measure.
Terry Moran, we've often learned after the fact that presidents had serious health problems in the White House, everyone from FDR to JFK, and even now Ronald Reagan as well. But this is the most serious public health crisis for a president probably since Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981.
No question about it. The other incidents where that 25th Amendment has been enacted is when there have been scheduled surgeries. This is the most serious condition that a president has faced since Ronald Reagan was shot. And there have been other presidents. Dwight Eisenhower had very serious heart attack when he was in the White House, and there was no 25th Amendment at that point. So this is something to take seriously. But it is important to remember most people have it, do recover, and the president gets the best medical care in the world. We are told, I should say, George, by the White House that the president has not invoked the 25th Amendment to temporarily transfer the powers and duties of the president to Vice President Mike Pence. And that makes sense as long as he is capable of making decisions. The concern about this and the difference between this and those other instances is in those other instances, there were going to be scheduled absences, as it were, of the president's decision-making capacity. He'd be under Reagan and Bush were under anesthesia when they handed over the powers. It will be hard to tell, and it will be only up to President to President Trump to decide when he feels he's got to focus on his health and not be president.
I have to tell you, we don't know exactly what condition the president is right now. We've heard the description from the White House and the White House doctor, but Terry, it does make me think of the trajectory we saw of Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, earlier during this COVID crisis, came down with symptoms, wanted to keep on working, kept on working for a few days, and then ended up in the hospital in quite a serious situation.
A very serious situation. His father said that they almost lost him. It was a very, very bad night, and Johnson himself has talked about that. There's one other aspect to that. Since he has returned, many observers in Parliament and in the British public are openly saying he is not the same man, that he is still struggling with what is being called long COVID by many, many people who've had it, that his focus and energy might not be the same. That's a very common after effect. Dr. Jen could talk about that. But this is a very serious situation, not just in the coming days and weeks, but perhaps one of the things the president would have to watch out for is what so many people are dealing with, that long COVID affliction.
Okay, Terry, thanks. Let me bring in our political analyst, Matthew Dowd. Matthew Dowd, of course, this is happening 32 days before the final votes of this presidential campaign, as millions have already voted.
Yeah, and that's the other complicated part of this is we've never faced a situation like this in the midst of a presidential campaign when people have already started voting. We've never faced it. Ronald Reagan was 2 months into his presidency when he was shot, so they weren't in the midst of a campaign. What happened with Eisenhower wasn't in the midst of a campaign. And so this is a huge difficulty, and it raises all kind of questions. Not only, I know you talked about the Trump campaign, it raises questions for the Biden campaign, because I think the Biden campaign is going to have to take this on a day-to-day basis. I know they say they're going out there and campaigning, they're going to have the right tone, but I think they have to really watch this and decide what to do as this moves forward and see how the president does in the midst of this. And then it complicates everything with everybody's already right in the midst of trying to make a decision on who they want to be the next president of the United States, and they see a helicopter on the South Lawn.
And you have this immediate question of debates. Right now, the Commission on Presidential Debates says that the vice presidential debate is going to go forward next Wednesday with Vice President Mike Pence, Senator Kamala Harris. The next presidential debate is scheduled for October 15th, which is just outside of the 14-day isolation period for people who've had COVID.
Well, I think they are saying that the vice presidential debate is going to be on, which I think as of this time on Friday is probably true. But things could be totally changed by Monday or Tuesday of next week in the midst of this. And I think every one of the people that are involved in this, the Biden campaign, the Trump campaign, the debate commission, is going to have to watch this and see how this unfolds to make sure the decisions they're going to make are reflective of what they want to see, what's going on at the White House, what's going on at Walter Reed, and make the best decision. So I think as of today it's on, but there's no, you can't guarantee that as of Monday or Tuesday that they make a different decision.
Well, and I want to bring that back to Jen Ashton. Jen, what is the right thing to do here? The vice president last saw the president, we are told, on Tuesday afternoon. They believe, the vice president's staff has said that they believe that means he is clear, doesn't have to quarantine, doesn't have to isolate in any way going forward. What are the best guidelines on what those who have come in contact with the president should do going forward?
Well, it's interesting, George, because we've heard a lot of controversy, as you know, in the last couple of weeks and months from the CDC, going back and forth on what they recommend. That's another piece of information that I think would be very interesting and important for the American public to know. What exactly is the testing protocol for the Vice President Biden? Are they being tested every single day? Are they self-quarantining at all? Are they keeping some distance between their spouses or their family when they're inside in an indoor setting? I can tell you again, because I've talked to Dr. Fauci about this, there's not one firm day that we can say, this is the day that if we test you and you're negative, you're in the clear. This virus is just too new, and we just don't have all that information right now. So we have to err on the side of caution, and that's why self-quarantining, if you've had a prolonged close exposure for 14 days, is recommended by the CDC. And testing, we heard Dr. Robert Redfield say it emphatically. If you've been exposed, you need a test. He just didn't say when.
Okay, Jen, thanks very much. Martha Raddatz, as we wait for the president to come and approach the helicopter, my mind is going back to that ceremony last Saturday, late Saturday afternoon in the Rose Garden when the president presented Judge Amy Coney Barrett. It was striking to see in that ceremony most of the invited guests not wearing masks, all of the military escorts wearing masks.
Yes, all the military escorts who led people into the Rose Garden had masks on. That is definitely the protocol for the military there at the White House. And on all military facilities, they are supposed to wear masks if they cannot socially distance. Outside, a little different. If they can socially distance, it is okay to do that. George, as I sit here and look at that helicopter, I can't help wonder how the president gets to it. Does he walk outside by himself? He'll certainly have to be with people who are in some sort of protective gear.
Important symbolic moment.
Does he walk out? I mean, this is a very vigorous president. I was struck today by the fact that we haven't heard from him at all. The last time we heard from him was last night on Fox News, talking about Hope Hicks. And in that conversation, the president was talking about the military. He was talking about Hope, and he said she's fantastic and she does a great job. But it's very, very hard when you are with people from the military or law enforcement and they come over to you and they want to hug you and they want to kiss you. Because we really have done a good job for them. I don't really know what he's talking about there. The last time there was anything with the military was on Sunday. It was for Gold Star families last Sunday evening. Most people in that room where they had that ceremony for those families did not have masks on and did not appear to be 6 feet apart, each of them. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was there. He has tested negative since then, his wife as well. But in that room, there were a lot of people without masks on that Sunday evening. But again, when he was escorted in, the military escorts did have masks on.
Okay, and Raman, let me bring you back in as Martha was talking about this walk to the helicopter, if it indeed is a walk from the president. Usually when he comes out and heads into Marine One, he often goes and talks to reporters on his way out. What will you be watching for as the president heads towards that helicopter this afternoon?
Well, remember the time he came back from Oklahoma, his tie was undone, and he looked dejected and down. And we all interpreted that was the first time we ever saw him without his tie perfectly cuffed. I think the question, like both a medical and political interpretation, will be: does he have the strength to make it from that helicopter, from the basically walking out the map room straight to the helicopter? How will he salute? How will he get up the stairs? Does he have both the strength? And this is a person. It's going to be an image, and it's the first time we're going to get that picture of the president. And they said he had a fever, but how it's affecting him, it will both project medically and it will project strength or not. And so that walk, I'm surprised, to be honest, they didn't do a car and they chose the helicopter and all this. And given the delay or timing here, my guess is this is out of my field, but since I'm a spin doctor, so I'll say it has some medical precaution. This is not reassuring that there's a delay here.
And Cecilia Vega, I mean, we had a lot of radio silence during the day from White House aides, although we've now seen Mark Meadows, the White House chief of staff, came out this morning briefly, and you now have this memo from the president's. Doctor, what's your sense behind the scenes of how this has hit inside the White House?
Well, George, look, I mean, people are actually really worried on a personal level. I mean, these are, small quarters behind closed door there in the West Wing. Folks who were on Air Force One are in close proximity to the president, to Hope Hicks. Hope Hicks is a valued aide who works with many members of the highest echelons of this administration. And people had close contact with both the president and Hope Hicks. And I think people are really worried about their own personal safety. They do get tests. They've all been tested, and hopefully that will alleviate some of the concerns. We haven't heard of any other high-level administration officials anyway testing positive, at least in the last few hours. But it's natural that folks who work in this administration would be really concerned about this. I echo Martha's and Ram's question about how we're going to see the president come out of this, because all I can think about right now, looking at this scene of Marine One parked there on the lawn, is that a graduation moment from a few months back when the president appeared to sort of stumble walking down the ramp after the speaking at a commencement, and he was so concerned about the public image that presented that it became sort of a story of his own making, because he kept trying to refute the fact that there was anything wrong with his health, pointing out the images and pointing out the videos and offering explanations over and over and over again. And all of us who've covered him for this long now know that this is a president who is consumed with his own image and public perception of, as Martha said, his vigor and his health and his strength and his leadership. And so this moment, be it orchestrated by doctors or be it orchestrated by the president, will be unlike anything we've ever seen before. And I don't know how he gets out of that White House and onto that helicopter right now, and whether that will be an image that he wants America to see right now.
And what it means for the president, if indeed it happens, spending a few days in the hospital in the month before an election. Melania Trump has also tested positive for COVID. I want to bring in Mary Jordan, who's just written a book on Melania and her time at the White House. We've learned a few details about her condition right now, also the condition of her son, Barron. Mary Jordan? I think her phone isn't connected right now. So let me bring in Lee Wright-Rickow from Harvard's Kennedy School. And Lee, I mean, for this to happen so close to the presidential campaign on the issue that's come to define the entire campaign is something we just haven't seen in presidential campaign history.
No, we haven't seen it at all. The closest that we've gotten is something like Hillary Clinton coming down with pneumonia almost exactly a month ago. A month to the state 4 years ago, and we saw how Donald Trump treated that and mocked it. He said it's an example of not having vigorous physique or stamina. So it's actually, there is a precedent in some regard, but we haven't seen something as large as the president actually coming down with it in recent history whatsoever. I think the real challenge here is to remember, this is a moment this is perhaps something that is to be expected in the end result of a president who's treated this pandemic like a hoax, who's really dismissed it, and so didn't even flinch when, we saw people at his rallies get sick from COVID-19, and now essentially has to face the music and has to face the consequences of coming down with this while still trying to maintain a healthy image to the public and also continue his campaign. How that plays out remains to be seen.
It is such a dynamic situation. I want to bring in Matt Dowd for a little bit more on this. You said everybody doesn't really know how this is going to play out over the next few days. Even the campaigns don't know how it's going to play out over the next few days. We've just seen an adjustment from the Biden campaign, an announcement that they've decided, at least for the time being, Matt, to pull down their negative ads as the president is heading to the hospital.
Yeah, I thought about that last night, and I thought to myself, that's what I would have done first thing this morning, is pull the negative ads. You could tell in his comments today in Grand Rapids, Michigan, he only mentioned the president once, and that was to say, I wish there was a speedy recovery. He never mentioned him again through his whole talk, didn't attack him, didn't go lambast him, didn't do any of that. I think they have to figure out the right tone in the midst of this. I think pulling the negative ads, as you say, is a good thing. I think the other question on the other side of the thing is, what do you do as the presidential reelection campaign? You're not going to obviously have the principal for any time soon in the midst of this. What kind of ads are you now going to run, or what type of campaign are you going to now push through in the midst of this? And I think it's important to keep in mind this moment comes when Joe Biden has maintained a significant lead nationally and in all the key target states in the aftermath of that first debate. And so what we're going to see is that I don't think we know what's going to happen in the debates. I don't think we know fundamentally the impact of what's going on the American public. And I don't think we know fully what exactly the campaigns are going to have to figure out how they're going to do and how they're going to adjust with this happening in the midst of a COVID crisis.
So, Rahm Emanuel, how does the Biden campaign strike the balance right now? I guess the decision today was go forward with your campaign event, pull down the ads. Is this just going to be day-to-day decisions?
Well, yeah, it's going to be day-to-day as events dictate. I would say that, this is a guess, not only they pull the negative, I bet you they put their foot to the gas pedal on the healthcare ad, where Biden's talking about how personal it is for him. So it's both also, not only the negative is down, what is the content of the positive? And I bet you in the rallies, he will continually repeat with his starting line about wishing both the president and the first lady a speedy recovery and well-being. And it is not only their well-being, but the well-being of the country. One of the best lines from his debate is, if you want to get the country moving again, we got to get COVID under control. And I think he will not only continue the campaign and make day-to-day adjustments, both to remarks, to the schedule, but also to reassure people. Because remember, his core message is, this is about the soul of America. This is about bringing us back together and remember what binds us as Americans.
And Rahm, on that point, as we've been speaking, actually, Joe Biden just sent out a tweet, quote, "This cannot be a partisan moment. It must be an American moment. We have to come together as a nation."
Yeah, and so to me, this is where they're going to finally, everything's going to go. I wouldn't be surprised if they said, if there's another way to not just go to the healthcare ad, the question is whether they cut another ad that's a little more about America, nation, because that has been what people loved about Joe through the primary and here, and the vice president rather, through this process, is his tone and tenor was different from the president's, and he struck a period of time that, again, we could differ on issues without being difficult with each other. And I think he will constantly adjust and move towards that safe space that has been his ace in the hole from the primary to the general election to this. And they're going to make adjustments to make sure they're never offside, out of bounds on that effort. And they can never be called, for a 5-yard penalty here. That's where this can flip quickly on you, and they're going to be stay within the lines and always draw in the lines.
We've just heard from Eric Trump as well on the tweet. Real Donald Trump is a true warrior who will fight through this with the same strength and conviction that he uses to fight for America each and every day. I ask you to join me in praying for his recovery. I've never been more proud of someone and what they have had to endure. We are coming up now on 6 o'clock in the east. What you're seeing there right there is Marine One at the White House preparing to take President Trump to Walter Reed Medical Center there on the right side. As we know, at 12:54 this morning, the president announced that he had tested positive for COVID. We learned this morning from the White House Chief of Staff that the president had mild symptoms, but over the course of the afternoon, The situation appears to have become somewhat more serious. The president reported to have a fever, chills, and a cough, the classic symptoms of COVID. Also reported to be taking an experimental drug from Regeneron, an 8-gram dose of an antibody cocktail, the White House saying is a precautionary measure. And now the president preparing to go to Walter Reed Medical Center, perhaps for a few days. Jen Ashton, talk about the course of the president's illness so far and what we can expect over the next few days.
Well, I think the thing, George, is that this virus has shown us that we really can't predict very much. No one has a crystal ball here. We are talking about someone in their 70s, with fever and chills. I can tell you when I have fever and chills, I don't know that I could make a 50-yard walk by myself to a helicopter. And obviously I'm not 74. So I think that every patient is different. We have to understand that this virus can be really unpleasant. We've heard many, many reports about that from everyone from Boris Johnson to the average person. And until it's in the rearview mirror, you really don't know what to expect in medicine. So I think that the treatment will be based on observation. There will be some aggressive measures taken, but also by the same token, some expectant and conservative measures in a hospital setting. So it's a very fine balance, and it's certainly not robotic or cookie cutter or one size fits all in nature.
One of the finest hospitals in the world, Walter Reed Medical Center. Rachel Scott is there on the scene. Can you detect any unusual activity yet, Rachel?
Not yet, George, but we are seeing people starting to arrive behind me as we await the president's arrival here at Walter Reed Medical Center. And this is just a stunning turn of events less than 24 hours after the president revealed that he has tested positive for COVID-19. He is now expected to spend a few days here at Walter Reed Medical Center. Now, the White House press secretary says the president will continue working out of presidential offices. Multiple officials tell us that he is expected to be receiving tests every single day. And the president, while in self-isolation, has been working throughout the day, but he is experiencing those mild symptoms, a low-grade fever, we are told, chills and congestion. Earlier today, he did speak to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who said he was in good spirits, George.
Thank you, Rachel. I want to bring in our White House producer, John Santucci. John, you've had the chance to speak with Don Jr., the president's son?
I did, Trump. I did, George. I just hung up with the president's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr. He told me he spoke to his father earlier this morning, describing the 74-year-old as in a good mood, pretty upbeat, but said he did sound a little tired when they spoke this morning, as he quickly turned the conversation to how things were out in the campaign trail. The president's eldest son telling me that he's never seen his father sick in 42 years and is hoping he's going to get back on the road soon. But obviously asking everyone to please keep his father in his thoughts.
And so we've heard from Don Jr. We saw that tweet from Eric Trump. We should probably also note that over the last now more than 5 years, Hope Hicks has really become part of the Trump family as well.
Oh, no doubt, George. She is the adopted child of the Trump family. The president himself often refers to her as Hopi, and someone that, for so long has been in tow with the first family. Her office, up until she departed the White House in 2018, was the closest one to the Oval Office, just outside the president's door. And when she returned this year, many aides in the West Wing and family members of the president actually welcomed it as someone that had the president's trust, loyalty, and his brain. And the secret weapon of Hope, as multiple sources have told me over the years, is that she's the only one that could tell him bad news, which is obviously a very tough task for anybody in the White House, and definitely a tough task for anyone that's been in the White House this year.
What do we know about how she's doing?
So, George, I've spoken to multiple sources that have talked to Hope within the last day. I'm told she's doing okay. She is exhibiting symptoms of the coronavirus. She has been resting at home. George, most of the White House aides that travel with the president are tested before they hit the road, and that's exactly what happened to Hope Hicks on Wednesday morning. She had joined the president on his trip to Minnesota. She had passed her COVID test. It came back as negative. And then as she was in the air with the president heading towards Minnesota, I'm told by sources that she started to feel ill, started to exhibit symptoms, and that's when she was actually said she should quarantine on board the plane. That's what she did. I'm told that things, unfortunately for Hope, did get a little worse after that. But she is at home. She is resting, and she is, hoping to make a speedy recovery.
Okay, John, thanks very much. Go do some more reporting now and come back when you've got it. I want to bring in Mary Jordan, who's just written a book on Melania Trump, The Art of the Deal. And Mary, Melania Trump also tested positive, that we learned that last night, has symptoms perhaps not quite as severe yet as her husband. And of course, they've also got to be concerned about their son, Barron, who's been living in the White House.
And also her parents. There perhaps is nobody more close to Melania than her elderly parents. And she has actually been caring for her mother, who was sick. So, there's a lot of concern for a very, very close family, the closest people on earth to Melania Trump, and she eats dinner and lunch and breakfast.
I think we lost Mary Jordan there again. Let me bring Matthew Dowd back in right now, Matt. As we see the White House, a crisp autumn day, Friday afternoon at the White House right now, waiting for the president to come out to Marine One. It's hard to imagine more of a surprise coming in the final weeks of a presidential campaign.
We're all been used to, you and I, and all of us have covered campaigns for so long, we're always used to the October surprise, but we've never been used to this kind of October surprise. This goes beyond any kind of surprise that we've seen. And one thing I'll say is I'm willing to bet my Texas land that the president walks out under his own volition on this, because I think he understands, as Ram was saying, he understands what that means if he doesn't. And how much that is important to him. So my guess is he's going to do that. So this is a surprise like any, George. There's all kind of questions that it raises as voting starts in the midst of this, as we talked about his campaign, what the Biden campaign does. We haven't talked about it enough, but Vice President Pence, who's been in contact with Donald Trump, what does he do in the midst of this when the president is going to the hospital? He's on the campaign ticket with the president. He was in contact with the president. What does he need to do in the midst of this? Does he not campaign? Does he not go out? So that's a whole other question.
Well, and let's try to at least try to answer some of them. I mean, the president, as you had pointed out, was coming into this week behind a pretty stable 7-point lead for Joe Biden over the last several weeks and months. Nothing seemed to shake that. This brings the coronavirus front and center once again. Can the White House team and the Trump team even mount a campaign at this point?
I don't think they can, actually. I don't think they can mount anywhere close to the campaign they thought about. But I think this is an entirely new territory for them, which may be actually good for them, because the campaign they were mounting wasn't working. The convention they held didn't move the numbers. The debate strategy they had didn't change the dynamics. So maybe not running any campaign is their best route to this, in any kind of scenario. But I think the problem the president has, and was mentioned earlier, is for somebody that has tried to discount coronavirus, that's kind of downplayed according to his own words, that has made fun of Joe Biden and made fun of people for wearing masks, for all his staff, little of who wear masks, to have the events that he has. For him now to be going to Walter Reed Hospital with coronavirus, I think puts a huge, huge dent into anything that they wanted to possibly say in the last 30 days.
Yeah, and Terry Moran, we were talking about Boris Johnson, British Prime Minister, earlier. He actually got a wave of sympathy in the wake of his hospitalization with COVID earlier this year. But the president is facing a much different situation, in part because for the reasons that Matt just mentioned, in part because he is right in the middle of a presidential campaign right now.
He is, when feelings run very, very high. Of course, everyone will want to unite and hope and pray for his speedy recovery. And if he does, when he does recover, there could very well be a rallying among his base and a new argument for him. Look, I beat it. We can do it, too. He'd need to modify, I think, some of the language that he's used around masks and other issues. But I've talked today with David Bossie, who was former deputy campaign manager of the Trump campaign, still very close to the president, saw him over the weekend. And he said that a campaign can go back to what they were doing during lockdown, that they did have the president on the phone, holding kind of virtual rallies on the phone. Certainly not the same thing as the Trump show in a real rally. But in also talking to voters in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, places I've been over the past few months, it sounded to me that the Trump supporters were willing to cut him some slack, as many voters are, about the original emergence of this pandemic. They saw it as an act of God. And now that he is afflicted with it, the question is, will that forgiveness, as it were, that understanding that I heard talking to voters, continue this deep into it?
In a deeply divided nation. Cecilia Vega, I guess one of the other quandaries for the president and his team is that it seemed like in recent days and weeks that since the convention, at least, the president and their team's entire strategy was to try to take down Joe Biden. That's what we saw at the debate the other night. Tough to do that when you're in the hospital, when the country's facing this health crisis.
Yeah, and George wanted to do that takedown at these kind of mega in-person rallies that we were seeing the president do, including, frankly, in some of these hot zones. The president had been planning to hold 2 rallies this weekend in Wisconsin. That's in spite of the fact that the coronavirus task force had called this state a red zone because of the high infection rate and these rising numbers that we're seeing there. And, you know, with the polls that you just mentioned in this widening gap between Trump and Biden, they were really hoping to try to close that gap in these final weeks of this campaign with this mega travel blitz that the campaign has, as of today, said that they're going to stop all in-person venues if they had planned to, and either cancel them outright or turn them into virtual events. It remains unclear how they're going to do that if, with this new development of the president being in Walter Reed for at least the next few days. We also know on the Biden side, we mentioned this earlier, that they've pulled negative ads. And I want to point out at the same time, our team is noting that the Trump campaign is still running attack ads on Facebook that are targeting Joe Biden right now. So it's, but I think the reality is both sides are struggling with how to do this, given the uncharted waters that we're in. And as of this morning, there were questions even about the health of the Trump family, the top tier of the Trump family, and them having to potentially be in isolation. You know, these are the folks who are help running the campaign, and even campaign staffers who had come into contact with the president as a result of that Bedminster event. So it's not just a function of can they hold these rallies for the voters and the Trump base and the supporters. It's can they actually physically do them if people who are running this campaign need to be in isolation.
Let's go back to Mary Bruce. She's in Wilmington, Delaware now with the Biden campaign. So we're seeing elements of a strategy coming together from the Biden campaign. He went forward with his event today, pulled down the negative ads. We just saw that tweet calling for unity. Are you able to pick up anything more about how they're looking at these next few days?
Well, the message coming from the Biden campaign is clearly to say that this is not political, that this is a moment for the country to try and come together and recognize that this virus is still a very real threat. That, of course, echoes the message that the Biden campaign has been making for the last several weeks, while the president and his campaign have tried to argue that the country is turning a corner, as Trump says. The Biden campaign says, no, we are very much still in the middle of this. That message, they believe, is now underscored by the fact that the president himself has now tested positive. But to the point that Cecilia was just making, regardless of which side of this campaign you're looking at, the campaign trail as we know it is now fundamentally changed with just 32 days until the election. The Trump campaign effectively screeching to a halt, the Biden campaign having to completely, or at least partially change their strategy. It is clear that they are still going to be traveling. Kamala Harris right now is heading towards an event in Las Vegas. Joe Biden just wrapping up this event in Michigan. Jill Biden was also on the road earlier today. So they are still getting out and about and talking with voters, still getting their message out. That message, though, is now being tweaked, of course, as they are ramping down their attacks and ramping up their language about the need for the country to come together.
And their message, both before and after the debate on Tuesday night, has been that they're going to go full speed ahead with the debates. They're willing to go again, despite what happened on Tuesday night. but that they're not going to go along with any change in the schedule. That's what I was told by a Biden campaign official earlier this morning. Do they expect the debates to happen?
That is such a good question right now, and simply nobody knows. I think the Biden campaign was still full steam ahead. The next face-off, of course, scheduled for just 2 weeks from now on October 15th. But the president's health and whether or not the president is able to attend safely, if he's even healthy enough, is the big X factor here. There's, of course, also the vice presidential debate, which is set to be held just next Wednesday. And while we know that the vice president, of course, has tested negative, there are questions, of course, about a need for isolation. We know that sometimes it can take several days after exposure for the virus to be detected. So whether or not we are going to see debates in the same timing that they were expected, in the same format that they were expected, are all big ifs right now, George. We simply don't know. And there are just too many X factors for either campaign, I think, to make a determination right now.
The Biden campaign and the former vice president himself have been extremely careful with COVID. As we talked about earlier, the vice president said he took 2 tests today. Should we expect that these tests are going to become relatively routine now?
Yeah, and he has been regularly tested even before this. I would suspect that they will become even more frequent. And it goes to just how different the 2 campaigns have been. As both of them have been ramping up their events, the president, of course, going back to those packed campaigns. He has been having a really jam-packed schedule as well. Joe Biden, even as he increases the number of events that he's been having, they are all with a very limited audience, making sure that everything complies with local guidance, the local safety precautions. He's always at a safe distance. You almost always see him wearing a mask, though sometimes he takes it off when he's actually delivering remarks. Today, you will notice he did not do that. I can tell you I've been at many of these events. I was just with him earlier this week, the day after the debate. Again, you'll often see the press sitting in those little circles 6 feet apart from each other. They take this very seriously. And even when he is not doing events, his staff is tested frequently. There's a very limited number of staffers that are allowed to have close access to the vice president. Even if they've tested negative, they're all required to wear masks. They take this virus very seriously. I suspect the strictness of their precautions is only going to increase now, George.
Right. And Cecilia Vega, at the White House, they've been somewhat more cavalier about masks on a day-to-day basis. I would expect that will change now as well.
Yeah, it's actually changing in real time, George. The pool reporters, the group of journalists who cover the president on a rotating schedule day to day, ABC is one of many outlets. The pool reporters, anyway, are reporting that the team of White House staff who are out there right now on the South Lawn waiting for President Trump to leave the residence and enter onto the helicopter Marine One are all wearing masks, including the press secretary, other staffers who are out there. It goes without saying they usually don't wear masks. And I'll repeat what we mentioned this morning on Good Morning America. It's one of the reasons, that cavalier attitude, that many news outlets, including our team at ABC, have pulled back, at least in terms of a full presence at the White House, for fear of the safety of our own team, because people were not wearing masks. We were not seeing events happening with social distance on a regular basis. You're coming into close contact with aides and Secret Service agents on a day-to-day basis. You know this. I mentioned this earlier. The quarters inside there for the press, particularly, are not very big at all. And so there have just been a number of questions about how seriously they were taking it. And of course, it all goes back to the statements that the president himself has made from inside that press briefing room, downplaying the severity of this and even turning the issue of masks into not just a political one, but a campaign one, where he just as recently as the debate challenged Joe Biden and mocked him essentially for wearing a mask as often as he does. And there you go, George. You can see the
helicopter now is getting ready to go. I think that's a pretty good sign that the president will not be speaking when he makes the walk to the helicopter. It wouldn't be possible really to hear anything he would say. But we have seen more activity now around Marine One. He's in fact, now we're told he went directly to the helicopter. Our cameras were not there to see him at that moment live. So he's in the helicopter now and getting prepared to go to Walter Reed for examination, for tests over the next several days. And he will have an office set up there, as we've said, to do work and to continue to make decisions over the course of the time that he is at Walter Reed. And as Cecilia and Terry reported earlier as well, he has not invoked the 25th Amendment in any way, will not be turning over any of the powers to the vice president as he's being treated for COVID. Jen Ashton, let's remind everybody the treatment he is getting right now. He's received a single dose of Regeneron, their antibody cocktail, but also, according to the president's doctor, zinc, vitamin D, I don't even know what this is, famotidine, melatonin we all know, and a daily aspirin. Jen? I think we don't have Jen Ashton right now either. Terry Moran, it is quite a sight simply to see that helicopter waiting to take off, knowing what's happening.
It is, George. He is the president of all Americans. We are a deeply divided country right now, but that is our president, the one officer of the government elected to serve and represent all the people. Many people don't like the way he does his job. Many people find him a threat to the country that he governs. But there's no question the Constitution put him there. That's our president, and this is a very serious moment given what we know about this virus. One can only wish him well.
Marine One slowly taking off from the south lawn of the White House, the president inside. We were told by the pool he was wearing a mask as he entered, wearing a suit and a mask as he entered the helicopter. Relatively short flight to Walter Reed Medical Center, Martha Raddatz, where the president's team will already, of course, be in place, ready to give him the best care. I have to imagine, though, the president has spent time at Walter Reed visiting wounded soldiers. I have to imagine this feels like a blow, though, to him, Martha, coming in these waning days of a presidential campaign.
It has to feel like such a huge blow. And again, this is a man who is vigorous. He counts on that energy. He does not like to be seen in any way as weak. And you can see the helicopter. I think it'll be there in a matter of moments. It's in Bethesda, Maryland. And for those viewers who don't know exactly where Bethesda, Maryland is, it's very, very close to Washington, D.C., just over the border, so he should be there quite quickly. I'm sure the doctors are standing by. I'm sure they have the VIP headquarters, is what it is called there, at Walter Reed, set up for the president. So if he can do work, he will do work. Again, very unusual that we haven't really heard from the president today, and so little information coming from the White House. And you have to believe that Americans right now, for the last hour and a half, have seen that helicopter sitting there with so little information about this. COVID, of course, has been the campaign issue for Joe Biden. I honestly can't imagine, George, some of these debates going forward at all, even the vice presidential debate, because as Matt and Cecilia have pointed out, it's about tone. It's about tone. And what do you say if you have a president?
It's almost impossible to imagine at this point.
It really is.
And Martha, we've seen outpourings of good wishes for the president from leaders all around the world, but also behind the scenes, I would assume at the Pentagon, some concern, will any of our adversaries try to take advantage of this moment?
You know, George, there is a minor bit of concern, but there are systems in place. They do not feel vulnerable. I've talked to some very senior military officials today who said everything is normal, everything is in place. But I will also tell you that social media has many things that are not true going on Twitter about, launching doomsday aircraft and things like that. So those rumors we certainly don't want out there because they're not true. Things are going on as normal. There are not concerns right now for national security. North Korea is not going to suddenly launch a missile or Iran try to take some move while the president is in the hospital because these systems are in place. You can see both of those helicopters now flying very close to Walter Reed now. I would say, just judging from what I can see, the tree line there, he should be there very, very soon.
It is
it looks like they're just about landing there at Walter Reed, a really massive facility with some of the best doctors in the world, and he will have at his disposal, of course, any doctors he probably wants, any specialists in this. The Secret Service also, George, we have to talk about the Secret Service they have been with him for days.
And there
That
we see,
certainly
Martha,
blood-
let me
there
interrupt you
he
now,
is.
because there is the picture earlier of the president walking out to the helicopter wearing that mask. Thumbs up from the president, his signature sign right there in a small wave.
And I suspect very much he wanted that picture, walking himself to the helicopter with those masks on. And you see all the staff around him, of course. They are protecting themselves as well. And the president, by wearing a mask, protecting them.
Jen Ashton seems to be walking relatively comfortably up those stairs as he was heading into Marine One. But as we were discussing, and we all know, some from personal experience, this can take so much out of you.
Oh, absolutely, George. Anyone who's ever had a virus with a fever, typically when you get chills in the setting of a viral syndrome, it is accompanied with a high fever. That makes people feel incredibly weak. There can definitely be changes in the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system with that. With a person who's been lying down all day suddenly has to get up and walk can be really, really difficult. It is pretty surprising that someone of this age, could handle anything like this. As I said before, I could tell you I probably wouldn't be walking if I were in that condition. It just really, really takes a lot out of you.
There again, we see the pool camera of the president walking to Marine One. Just a few moments ago, he's just about to land now at Walter Reed. John Carl now in place at Walter Reed. Can you see the helicopters?
I can see Marine One headed this way. I'm right across the street from Walter Reed. Looks like he'll be landing momentarily. George, as you know, the White House, in the very little bit of information we've heard, the statement from the press secretary says that he will be here for a few days working at what they call the presidential offices here at Walter Reed. And I can now see the helicopter coming into view quite clearly.
And John, have you been able to get any other indication from the White House as we see the helicopters preparing to land there about what more information we will be getting from the president, his team, his doctors?
George, the thing that we have asked for repeatedly is information directly from the doctors, a briefing directly from the doctors. We have the statement that you've discussed. This is the second statement from his doctor explaining what exactly he has taken in terms of this antiviral cocktail. But very little information beyond that, really no official information beyond that. And the challenge here, George, is that as we get statements from the president's press secretary, there's just a real question about the reliability of the information, given that they have not been particularly transparent, especially on issues of the president's health, but on other issues as well, which is why the request that's being made by me and by so many other reporters is to get official information directly from the president's doctor. And here, as you can hear, the sound of Marine One, it is just about to land.
Marine One about to touch down at Walter Reed Medical Center. President Trump is inside. As we've said, he's preparing to spend a few days, according to White House officials, to be treated for COVID-19. Melania Trump, the First Lady, of course, also tested positive. She stayed back at the White House. As John said, we have not heard beyond these paper statements from the president's doctors what more they can tell us about his condition. But we do know that they would not be taking this step if they didn't have to, if it wasn't absolutely necessary in their mind at this point for the president to be in a hospital setting, to have access to the world's best doctors and the best equipment. As we see everyone crowding around, we're not really sure what exactly we're going to be able to see of the president as he walks inside. And it brings to mind...
George, you still here?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, George, it's quite a scene here. As I mentioned to you, I'm right across the street from Walter Reed. Crowd of people across the way. As word got out that the president was heading here to Walter Reed, you have people coming over to try to catch a glimpse. Obviously, the view quite blocked. But what a sight to see Marine One essentially medevacing the President of the United States here to the Walter Reed Medical Center. We saw him walk to the helicopter on his own, but still quite a scene, essentially a medevacing of the President of the United States.
What a year 2020 has been. It began with impeachment for the president, the pandemic, racial riots and protests in the streets over the course of the summer, and now President Trump heading into Walter Reed Hospital to be treated for the coronavirus. We're going to move now to World News Tonight with David Muir. Stay with us.
This